let's see. Here's one. How far down the supply chain, suppliers of suppliers, do you recommend in your Scope 3?
So the first step of doing a Scope 3 analysis is really setting a boundary. If you're talking about an agricultural product, let's say wheat that's purchased by a bakery, you're going to look at the impacts on the farm of fuel use, whether it's diesel in the tractors or any other fuel, and the use of pesticides and herbicides that have to be produced in a factory somewhere. But you're not going to be looking at the production of the tractor itself. In the case of the tractor, it's used over so many years, over so many tons of wheat, that the added emissions really are quite minimal, and it's not worth your time to calculate them because it'll come out to fractions of a gram per ton of wheat. You know, the drawing of the boundaries is very important and seeks to exclude those emissions that are either negligible or extremely difficult to calculate and that don't amount to much in the whole.
Okay, here's another supply chain question. You mentioned that a supply chain standard will be out in the next 2 years. Is there any interim guidance you can direct us to?
Yeah, so that standard for supply chain and for carbon neutral products that I was referring to is being developed by the partnership between the World Resources Institute and the World Business Council on Sustainable Development. They developed the initial greenhouse gas protocol that's used for corporations and for projects, available at ghgprotocol.org, and we're currently developing this new protocol for supply chain accounting, and it's due out in late 2010, and with the final version due out in 2011. In the meantime, there is a protocol out there called PAS 2050, PAS 2050, that's out of the UK, which covers pretty much the same scope with a little bit different of an approach. At present, that would be a good start. I'd also like to point you in the direction of the ISO 14064-1 standard, which is the corporate accounting standard, which was designed to be modular so that you can aggregate emissions up the supply chain using this standard.
Okay, I'm going to kind of combine two questions here, and you can take it where you will. One is, do you think transportation-related emissions will be included in any U.S. cap-and-trade system? And another one is there any impending legislation for carbon credits? They're both related to governmental compliance.
Yeah, so with the new Obama administration, we haven't heard too much specifics on future greenhouse gas legislation that's coming. We heard during the campaign that Obama is in favor of a cap-and-trade system with full auctioning of those compliance credits at the beginning, which I am in favor of. But with the economic crisis basically taking the headlines right now, a lot of that has taken a back seat for now. But the stimulus bill, which is due to be signed today, does have a lot of great provisions in it for clean technology and renewable energy, which will get us started in the right direction. I would suspect that in the next few years we will have a federally mandated cap-and-trade system. I do suspect that the Obama administration is going to be going to play a much greater role in global climate change talks. The next major talks coming up in Copenhagen later this year on deciding the replacement for Kyoto after it expires soon. And I would also suspect that current voluntary systems in place and regional systems in place in the U.S. Will sort of merge into this national system. So companies that are participating in AB 32, in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, the California Climate Action Registry, or the Climate Registry will be well positioned for that future legislation.
Okay, here's a more general question. I think a lot of people may be feeling this way. It's hard to know where to start with regard to all of this. Where should a company start?
So I've talked a lot about Scope 3 emissions because in a lot of companies, Scope 3 can account for 90+% of the emissions. But the first step is really accounting for the company's direct and indirect emissions. So any of the fuel combustion that the company directly is responsible for, any of the electricity use. This is a great start to get your feet wet, to start to understand the accounting frameworks that are in place. And then, keep your eye on Scope 3 emissions and start working with some of the voluntary programs out there, like the Climate Registry, to basically get involved in this space more and more, and to position the company much better for future legislation.
And then, I could even add in there, Pablo, that one of the things that Climate Earth really tries to do is help those companies that have taken some steps to do their Scope 1 and 2. And we tried to rapidly help them see the whole picture of what that Scope 3 might be like, and provide some context to your point about maybe 80 or 90% of the emissions being Scope 3. Sometimes that's a really great way to start, because when you can see the whole pie chart, you kind of know which areas you might want to target for more in-depth analysis. Mm-hmm. And as everybody knows, the more it's a rabbit hole. So the more you get into it, the more you discover you have more to do.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that an example from a client I had. It was a large industrial baking facility, and they realized that their natural gas emissions were quite high, and that led them to look a little bit closer. They have 3 shifts a day, during which the ovens are used for about 6 hours of that shift. Typically, at the beginning of the shift supervisor goes in and turns on the oven so that they can warm up. Of course, the oven doesn't need to be warm for the first 2 hours of the shift because the dough is being prepared and so on. So this company was able to significantly reduce their natural gas use by turning the ovens on 15 minutes before they were actually needed rather than at the beginning of the shift.
Okay. Boy, there's so many good questions in here, and we won't get to them all today, but let's see how many of these we can get through. What's the difference between a renewable energy credit and a carbon credit?
Good question. The renewable energy credit is basically a credit that's derived from the production of renewable energy. So if your company is purchasing grid electricity that comes from whatever source is available, and your company doesn't want to invest in directly in putting solar panels on the roof, for example, you can actually buy renewable energy credits, which is a contractual arrangement under which you are basically taking credit for the green attributes of electricity produced elsewhere at a wind farm or at a solar facility, and so on. Carbon credits, on the other hand, go far beyond just the greenhouse gas emissions from electricity. You're basically purchasing emissions reductions that occur elsewhere, regardless of the way in which they are created, whether it's methane capture and destruction at a landfill, or energy efficiency improvements, or even a renewable energy project. But one important thing is that a renewable energy project can't generate both RECs and carbon credits.